Welcome to the Gary Null Show, a program designed to enhance mental, physical, and spiritual well-being through science and the wisdom of the ages. Let us take you on a journey of empowerment. Sit back, relax, and get ready to change your life for good.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null. I'd like to welcome you to the Gary Null Show. This is the place to come to if you want programs you're just not going to see anywhere else. I can promise you at the end of this program, you're going to have insights and information that will stimulate constructive thought and change.
What does love have to do with relationships?
Well, if you start off with the idea that a relationship is based upon what you're willing to share of yourself, instead of trying to find the love you're not willing to manifest for another person, but find the love that another person's willing to manifest for you, then you have a bad relationship. Because how often have we felt that somehow I don't feel the love, but when I'm around you, I do, so then therefore the other person becomes the magnet for us. So let's say one person is able to manifest a love, a passion for life and the joy of being around other people, but you don't. Let's say you have that energy blocked. You've made the wrong exchanges. Every time you look at something, a tape goes off in your subconscious and says, don't be open, don't be vulnerable, don't explore, don't share, and then that's what you do.
Can love ever die? Absolutely it can. In many different ways. One, love can be killed by a shock of betrayal, whether it's somebody not living up to a promise of being a protector, where a man gets scared and runs away, leaving his woman behind. I'm giving an extreme example. And that shock can kill love. The pain of recognition that the person was betrayed, or infidelity. In other way, love can be suffocated. Yes, it starts as love. And then one of the people in a relationship becomes too needy or jealous. And the person who is the recipient of this jealousy is no longer capable to appreciate the other person, but they're in a mode of survival. And if it lasts for a long time, love suffocates. Another way of killing love or making love fade away is when a couple doesn't make an effort of spending time together. They have their separate lives. Yes, they fell in love. And then they are too busy with life. Or they both have children and it all becomes about children. They do not invest in the relationship and love can fade away. It doesn't mean if it faded away, oh, you never loved each other. It was there, but you didn't make an effort. You did not nourish that love. And as I said, it's like a baby. For it to grow, mature, and become that real love about which we are all dreaming, you need to make a great investment.
We like to think that we're living in this moment. We like to think we're conscious of this moment. We like to think that this moment is where we're making our choices. Rarely does that happen. Probably 95% of everything we do every day comes from our subconscious. Those tapes, those millions of tapes. And Bruce Lipton showed time and again that every experience we have in life, every thought, every deed, every action, every smell, every taste, every experience is encoded.
The biggest problem reprogramming the subconscious mind is that we've held some kind of belief that if I become consciously aware of something, then I have profoundly influenced the program of the subconscious mind. And this is where our problem rises, because there is a disconnect that the two minds are separate elements. One is the equivalent of a tape recorder, and the other is the creative mind, the conscious creative mind. So I have a new idea in my creative conscious mind that I want to be in love, I want to have harmony, I want to share my life with all these people in this community. That's a wonderful conscious expression, but the question is, just because I acquire this in my conscious mind, did this in any way influence the programming in the subconscious mind? And the answer is not really, and the reason is this. The subconscious mind is more like a machine, like a tape player. So just to give you an analogy, a simple story is I have a program on a tape player, I push the play and the program repeats, and every time I push play, I repeat the same program. Well, imagine if you didn't like the program. How much talking and yelling at the tape player will it take before the tape changes? And the answer is, it will never change that way. The significance is this: you can change the tape, but there are processes like pushing the record button that will engage the new tape information to be overwritten on the old program. My point. Just because our conscious mind becomes totally aware of another way and a better way of life, it in no way impacts the original programming. You must do processing to get this programming in. So if you understand the nature and characteristics of how the subconscious mind learns, and then use that learning process, then we are able to more effectively change the program. But the most important thing is this. Just because our conscious mind sees that the program isn't good and we talk to ourselves, did that talking change the program? And the answer is no. So the hardest problem is to be aware of where you want to go and yet still find yourself replaying the same old limiting, self-sabotaging program, even though your conscious mind is quite aware of another way of life.
Then let's say something now is a stimulus, a smell. And suddenly a smell comes to us and immediately a tape goes off. Oh, 6 years old, just smelt fresh cut grass. The fresh smell of that in the spring. I mean, I think all of you would recognize, gee, that brings back memories, right? Or you smell apple pie, suddenly memories of being a kid and the comfort. Let's say that you have a particular sound that you like, a music, and suddenly you hit the music and boom, it brings back memories. Those are all good. But what about the way someone looks at us? What about the way someone speaks to us? What about the way someone gestures? If you just were in a relationship and someone says something that had nothing to do with anything except that's how they're expressing themselves, but your mind interprets, my dad used to point when he spoke and suddenly I was always being chewed out, I was being criticized, and now you're thinking this person is sharing an energy that your father, you know he's not your father, but you're acting emotionally as if he were. And now that's causing you to feel a certain emotion, but your feelings are not real. What's causing the feelings are not real. How your body's manifesting the feelings are real.
It's always out of bounds to physically aggress against your partner. That's a line that should not be crossed. And what we would want to do is to stay away from other kinds of verbal abuse, which most people don't know how extensive the list is of things that are verbally abusive. For instance, being sarcastic is a form of verbal abuse. Yelling at you is a form of verbal abuse. Calling you names is a form of verbal abuse. Comparing you to other people who do it much better. Saying, oh, you're your mother's daughter, knowing full well that you and I don't think a whole lot of your mother's behavior, that's a form of verbal abuse. There's all kinds of ways to be abusive to your partner verbally. Once again, that doesn't mean this relationship should come to a screeching halt, but rather we need to talk about that and do what we can to arrest those patterns and to learn healthier ways to communicate and to relate to each other.
Curious when we talk about especially the phrase sarcasm. Sarcasm is an interesting tool. It can be both funny and hurting, and depending on how it's used. If someone's sarcastic about something in general, it can be very funny, very witty. But if you're sarcastic at someone else's expense, that's hurt, that's abuse, that's wrong. When they look at the research in terms of healthy relationships, they talk about oftentimes there's 5 positive comments that are made to 1 negative comment. In unhealthy relationships, it's 1 to 1. It may feel 1 to 5, but it's actually, here's 1 positive, but here's a negative. You get these hypercritical loved ones or parents, and they're saying, well, you did this, but this isn't done. And so you're teaching it's never good enough. It's never enough. You can't be right. There's always something wrong, and so you're belittled, you're devalued no matter what you've done. And so here you are trying to do something, the desired behavior. It should be reinforced. Instead, you got this hypercritical individual who then starts cutting, and that's where abuse takes place. And so when we look at the healthy relationships, we encourage people, just focus on your dynamic right there. Is that the normal process?
Not only did the research suggest that those are the relationships that last, and all it took was 1-to-1 for the relationship to crash and burn, but the nice thing about 5-to-1 is it affords us a cushion. If I'm forever building you up and saying positive things and giving you attagirls, the times that I do slip don't feel nearly as devastating because what you get from me is overwhelmingly positive.
I tend to also want to encourage families and couples in particular. It's far less important to prove you're right than it is to get along. Compromise, negotiate, being thoughtful for someone else. Think about it. A loved one expresses to you something that they would like, and as though somehow that's an abusive thing, like they'd say, I'd like you to speak in a lower voice. You don't have to yell. I'll listen to what you have to say. And somehow the person doesn't hear that as a, oh, well, wait a second, I can compromise. I don't have to be screaming just because that was the way I was taught. Most people who are abusive have come from abusive backgrounds. Just because you come from an abusive background doesn't mean you will be an abusive individual. But if you are, it's usually based on something that you've been exposed to, that this seems normal, you've been taught this, it's been role modeled. And for those individuals, getting this type of loving feedback is vital. To be able to develop new skills is a challenge. And for them to be motivated when we look at that stages of change, are they at a place to be able to make that type of committed change? So to be able to get someone to compromise, negotiate, communicate, be compassionate and thoughtful, that's vital in a relationship.
Literally, we can make ourselves sick, have high blood pressure, age prematurely, create stress hormones simply because of an inappropriate response to someone in a relationship. Now, versus this, a person who's loving, who's kind, who's thoughtful, who's giving, and we think, oh my God, that's really good. So what do? We want that person in our lives, but we aren't manifesting that ourselves. More often than not, what will happen is instead of taking that as an example of what we could do in return, by being disciplined and focused and being aware when we make an inappropriate choice and stopping, pushing stop on the tape recorder in our brain saying, no, I'm not going to go there, because if I go there, it's going to be negative and there's going to be negative feedback and I don't want to destroy the energy. Instead, more often than not, we just become a sponge for someone's giving to us, but it's a sponge that ends up draining.
My research, which started about 1967, I was studying stem cells. And I put stem cells in a tissue culture dish. And what I would do is create a culture dish of genetically identical cells, change the culture medium, and as I change the culture medium, which is the environment for the cells, I change the expression or fate of the cells, the genetic activity. This influence of the environment on changing genes is called epigenetics. Well, I'm doing this in a petri dish with stem cells. We must understand a very important fact, that a human being is the equivalent of a skin-covered petri dish. A human has about 50 trillion cells growing inside their body, and the growth medium inside the body is called the blood. So by changing the composition of the blood, the chemical composition of the blood, I am influencing the genetic activity of the cells. Whether I do it in a plastic dish or whether I do it in your skin-covered petri dish body, it's still the influence of the environment affecting the genetic readout. Now here's where the important issue comes in regard to love and fear in our lives. The blood is the culture medium of the body's cells. And if I change the composition of the blood, then I change the fate of the cells. Well, the question is, what controls the blood's composition? The answer is, the brain controls the composition of the blood. And the brain controls that chemistry of the blood in regard to our perceptions of life. So if I'm in love, I release different chemistry from my brain than if I'm in fear. For example, in love, I release oxytocin, serotonin, and growth hormones. These chemicals in the blood cause the growth and enhancement of the health of cells, whether it's in a human body or whether it's in a plastic dish. In contrast, when I'm in fear, I release stress hormones such as cortisol or norepinephrine or histamine. Those chemicals actually change the fate of the cells and put the cells into a protection posture. So it comes down to very simply this. Our attitudes or our perceptions of the environment, whether it includes love or whether it includes fear, changes the chemistry of our blood via the action of the brain, and the chemistry of our blood adjusts the genetics of our cells, epigenetics. So therefore, it is profoundly important what you perceive in life, because your perceptions are actually altering and directly influencing your gene activity, and there is a very profound difference between the chemistry that's released when a person in love and the chemistry that is released when a person is in fear, for example. So therefore, it really is incumbent upon us to recognize that our emotions and attitudes and responses to the environment are controlling our genetics via the chemistry of the blood.
It's very interesting to me, coming through hardcore science, that I was trained in almost the cellular end of survival of the fittest. What happens to cells as they evolve, in beings and species as they evolve. But my personal experience was discovering the power, if you will, of compassion, and the information that comes out of cultures where cooperation and compassion work rather than competition. So I see in the sort of large sweep of things the efficacy of compassion. At a cellular level, compassion has now been shown to create neurogenesis. The brain cells in the cortex of our brain that are crucial for cognition, for doing all of the mental activity we need to do, especially as we age, are replaced when we engage exercise, fine motor skills, and compassion. This is an amazing thing, that there's actual cells within our body that respond to the emotion, the actions of compassion. It was thought for a long time that the minute we're born and in the first few months of life, we have all the brain cells we're ever going to have. The truth is that our brain cells do divide. They are replenished very slowly. And technology has had to develop to be able to show us that they actually do divide, that there are new ones that are formed. And compassion actually is one of the facilitators, if not the driver, that allows those brain cells to be replenished. I think that's really incredible news, and allows us to develop what is, I believe, natural to us as human beings. I see it in animals. Also, there's a sense of cooperation in many species. And when we learn that as humans, and we move and walk in our lives with a true sense of cooperation and acknowledgement, honoring of each other, life certainly goes better in our communities, but it also goes better in our own bodies and inside our noggins.
To manifest unconditional love, you must make 2 steps. 2. First, you must be aware of stepping away from your conditioned negative response. That's good. But you must also then be highly proactive to stepping into self-actualizing love. Self-actualization of love means you cannot say I love you and do something negative. How many times have people said love in the same word? They were hypercritical, or negative, or judgmental, or made us feel in some way obligated. They tried to use the word love as a way, oh, it's like this. But I give you love. And then suddenly you know what's coming. They're going to try to say something negative to you as if by making you feel bad about yourself, they can control the energy that they're exchanging. Anyone who does that is not sharing love. No matter how many times people say the word love, or my heart's bleeding, and my heart's breaking. No heart breaks when a person's manifesting love, but hearts do go through, and a person does manifest a physical reaction when the needs that are conditional are not being met. Watch how many times you can do something wonderful to a human being, with a human being, for a human being, and that's okay. The moment you don't, watch how quickly they come at you. How many times have you done something for someone out of love, and when you stop doing it, suddenly they threw it back at you like, well, you owe me, and you can't owe someone love. It's not a commodity. You can't barter it. So understand what love isn't in a relationship. Love is not one person demeaning another and expecting the other person to abdicate so they come back so they can share love. You're not sharing love when someone does something negative. Let me explain that again. When someone says something negative and does something negative, it is not love that they're manifesting or sharing. It is a dark side, conditional need in their own tortured and perverse way that they're making judgments against you so that you will surrender to them. And we've heard surrender to love. Never surrender to love, because it's not love you're surrendering to. Anybody that wants you to surrender your authentic self is manipulating you. Again, it's what love is not. And then when people do surrender to have their relationship or what they feel is important in that relationship, then they're going to find one day where they wake up as, gee whiz, why am I feeling this way? Why are you speaking this way? Why are you doing this? And it had nothing to do with love.
When we have a profound, tender affection for another person, we can be in danger of losing ourselves in them. And then it's not an organic, mature relationship. It can take over our lives in some sense, and then we really don't know who we are. It's about the reflection of the other. It's always important when we do love the other to have that reflection and understanding and see a mirror in ourselves through the other, but not with merging.
In today's world, we're really focused on the kind of information that we receive from our leaders and our teachers, and frequently what we start to recognize is this is not very supportive of our lives or the lives of others on this planet. So the question is, what can we do in the face of programming that is personally limiting and sabotaging or negative in the world that we're living in? The most important thing we can understand is that we must start operating from a level of consciousness and let go of the automatic subconscious programming. With consciousness, we are empowered to create the world that we want. The subconscious mind is basically just filled with programs primarily downloaded from other people. So when we're operating from our subconscious mind, we're not necessarily fulfilling what we want in our lives. We are fulfilling the programs of other people. So if we want to make a change, then it's incumbent upon us to know that we must start operating consciously. Be here now. Pay attention to what's going on, because in the moment of now, you have absolute control. Now, a very interesting point about this is the relationship of when people fall deeply in love. And why I bring this up is there's a period called the honeymoon. And the honeymoon period, if you ask anybody who's deeply engaged in a very active honeymoon, you say, are you healthy? And they would say, yes. And I say, do you have energy? And they say, yes. And I say, how's your world? And they would say, it's heaven on earth. Everything is beautiful and everything is wonderful. And before that honeymoon wears out, then realize this. When a person is fully in love, they're actually creating heaven on earth. When the honeymoon ends, it's because the subconscious programming of others starts to interfere with our lives and our creation begins to fall apart. My point about this is very simply, when we're on our honeymoon, it's because we are not relying on our subconscious programs. We're relying on our conscious creativity. So the issue is, do you want to create heaven on earth? And the answer is yes. Well, then we have to acquire that ability to get back into conscious control, just like we were in when we fell in love, because that's when we created heaven on earth. And so it's important to recognize, A, we can do it, and it's been done many times in our lives, and B, it really is an active process on our part to not rely on the subconscious programming, but to actually take control of our lives using our conscious belief system.
There's a basic rule in physics. No two energies can share the same space with equal intensity at the same time. So there is where you got to think. If I'm making a negative choice, I'm preventing a positive choice from manifesting. I can't be happy and sad, positive and negative, kind and unkind, honest and dishonest simultaneously. I can be one or the other. And generally, whatever we master, then everything else becomes subordinate to it. So we want to be with love. I want love, but you act in ways that are not loving. How many times have you heard someone say, "But I love you," and then they do something bad, right? Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, if you love me, then you're not going to do something bad. For example, if you lie to this fella, but you don't lie to that guy, are you a liar?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you steal from him, you don't steal from him, are you a thief?
Absolutely.
If you betray him but don't betray her, are you a betrayer?
Yes.
But understand something, most people would never like to think of themselves as a liar, a thief, or a betrayer, so they live with the illusion of what they would like to be and not deal with the reality of what they are. I'm saying the only way you can heal, the only way you can get to access your authentic self is stop living in denial of what you actually are. And that is the dark side, the conditioned side. Hope you've enjoyed it. We'll continue next week. I'll see you then.